is Brittany Lane. I'm the Director of Educator Preparation at the Department of Higher Ed. There are about 22 colleges and universities around the state that offer educator preparation programs. And we at the department provide oversight and support for that. Me and my new colleague, Sam Fogelman, who is joining us today as well. One of the important things that we do is, try to create space for educator preparation faculty to come together to learn with and from each other. And this was an important topic also due to some legislation that was passed in the spring, also around diversifying the educator workforce. And being such an important topic and having so much expertise in the state, we wanted that to be the focus of this year's convening. So thank you for coming, and thank you to our participants for joining, and to our presenters who we have today. We have, I am looking on my information. Dr. Chalane Lechuga is an associate professor in the Department of Chicano Studies at Metropolitan State University of Denver. Dr. Ofelia Schepers is an assistant professor in elementary education and literacy, also at MSU Denver. And Dr. Michael Benitez is the vice president for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, also at MSU Denver. Thank you all.
Thanks for inviting us and having us this I guess it's now noon officially. I'm gonna post up some slides. I'll do my best to navigate through them on behalf of my colleagues. Let's see. So I think, and then if let's see, put this in presentation mode, correct? You should all be able to see these. Okay. Great. Okay. So I'm gonna actually, my colleague, Dr. Benitez is gonna get us started, and then we're gonna kind of roll through these and use the last portion of our time together to engage in dialogue with you all. So Dr. Benitez.
Right on. Thank you, Dr. Lechuga. So first of all, welcome and hello, everyone. It's truly a pleasure to always be in dialogue and conversation and, a feeding of each other's sort of experiences and what we all bring to the table. So first I want to do one thing. First, I want to acknowledge that here in Denver in particular, we stand in the Arapaho, Cheyenne nations, among others, and the need to recognize that particular relationship and the need to continue to try to mend that as best as possible. So that acknowledgement for me truly matters anytime at the beginning. Second, let me take us through just at least a highlight of what we're gonna discuss, and then Dr. Lechuga and Dr. Schepers are gonna chime in. But we titled it Trial Successes and Ideas for a Continued Trajectory to Faculty Diversification. I've been here 2 years, a little bit over 2 years. Dr. Lechuga has been here about a decade, maybe a little bit more or less. I can't get my years right. And Dr. Schepers, I think, has been here a bit longer than I have. But in arriving here, I want to acknowledge one particular piece, right? That even as I came and offer and bring a very particular lens, that truly, this work has been about building on what has, the path that has been paved by, many different, faculty already, and how do we synergize those efforts so that we can move forward? So we want to be able to speak. If you could go to the next slide, Dr. Lechuga. We want to be able to speak to the yester in particular, speak to where we have been, what are some of the things that have been working, not working. We're going to speak to some of what we're doing now and offer some analysis, and then we're going to highlight some of the different initiatives and future work going forward that I hope we can certainly engage some conversation around. So with that said, the slide that you have in front of you at least outlines in particular some of our BIPOC representation by way of not only students, but also by way of our faculty at this point. And in this case, full-time faculty, which includes our category 1s and category 2s. Our category 1s are tenure track. Our category 2s are full-time, not necessarily tenure or tenure track. But if you start to look at some of these numbers, you begin to see that in looking at the Black African-American sort of constituency, we have a faculty base that is below representation by way of students. And so we ask that question, what does it mean to at least, right? There's no real benchmark out there that says, oh, if you reach this much amount of diverse faculty or faculty of color, then that's that's the threshold and you've arrived, right? And so what does it mean to both diversify, but to also, continue to operate strategically and through missions, through the continuation of the diversification that ties to not only what you represent by way of students and eventually the communities that you serve, but also by way of kind of the moral ground and why it's important to have as diverse a faculty representation as possible. Like many institutions, you can see that when it comes to our Native students, and as well as with our Native faculty, we struggle and have these challenges. But I also want to throw out there, right, and this is important to mark, that many of these institutions that are, PWIs or HWIs, historically white institutions, predominantly white institutions, don't necessarily function like tribal colleges through an epistemic lens that offers the type of pedagogy and missions that students culturally buy into from the onset and the challenge tied to that. When we move to our white students, you see that we have an overrepresentation of white faculty to white students. This is usually pretty common across all universities and colleges, but I think that we're faring when even we look at national trends way better than even most institutions by way of that gap because we have such a high amount of students of color. We are a minority serving institution and we're also a Hispanic serving institution. So when you think about our students of color at almost 50%, something like a full-time faculty, especially white faculty at 72, doesn't seem too far-fetched. But then in the other way, it actually seems more far-fetched because it requires some bags of us to do an even better job and be more intentional about how we think strategically recruitment can look like and structural processes can look like, so we could assure a more diverse pool of faculty to be able to be as representative of our student body. When we look at Asian faculty, you also see that we have a bit more faculty represented than we do students. And when we think about Hispanic students, and that's a big area that we're focused on, and a significant part, one of our pillars with respect to strategy around the diversity strategic plan is, what does it mean to lean into Hispanic servingness? If we are to assume now this designation, and we have been for a bit over 2 years now, back in February 2019, at 9.5% Latinx faculty versus 31%, Latinx students, how do we work to close, that gap? But how do we also do it in the spirit of meeting the needs of all? And then lastly, and we see this, we're starting to see this trend a lot, particularly with multiracial students and also with multiracial faculty, except that data becomes a little bit more difficult at times to collect, one, because there's no real way to identify what specifically by way of multiraciality or multi-ethnicity are we talking about when we're using not only that terminology, but to really describe representation to representation, since multiracial embodies so much in so many different experiences. But that's truly for us in many ways at the onset and at the ground of what we're trying to establish here by way of the data we're looking at, the data we've gathered, and future directions. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Dr. Lechuga to take the conversation from here.
Okay, let me see if I can, okay, there we go. So we felt that it was important to provide that introduction, but also to sort of give you the demographic landscape to get a sense for what our campus demography is and how that informs the work that we do. And I would like to say that the data has driven a lot of what we're doing, and it has. But it really has been more organic than that, in that at the same time as we're collecting data, collecting additional data, we're also being responsive in terms of program, policy, and practice. And so it's sort of been, again, an organic process whereby we work with the data we have, we move forward program, practicing, and policy while also pursuing additional data collection. And one of the, beyond sort of reporting demographic data, one of the research endeavors we've undertaken, that I've undertaken as part of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, is an assessment of tenure success at our institution. And so I have looked across the institution at cohorts of faculty coming into Metro, going all the way back to 2005 to the most recent cohort to have moved through the tenure cycle. So it takes around 4, 5, or 6 years at our institution to apply for tenure. So we have to wait. When a cohort of faculty comes in the door, we follow them over time, but we're really looking for those markers of tenure at year 4, 5, and 6. So all of that to say, we've compiled all of that data in this very busy slide, but the most important, oh, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead on another slide. I'm going to jump forward and then jump back. We've compiled all of that data into, let's see if I can get this to go forward. There we go, into this table here. And so you get a sense for what our tenure success rates look like as one indicator of, one critically important indicator of retention for our tenure track faculty and ultimately success among many. However, as you can see from this table, if we look at tenure success by race, and we, because the numbers of BIPOC faculty are small in comparison to our white faculty, as Michael just shared earlier, we've kind of aggregated them into a BIPOC faculty category. And so the yellow line is our white faculty tenure success percentage. The green line is our BIPOC faculty tenure success percentage. And then the orange line is overall, right, across all faculty. And so you see some interesting trends emerging with the recent downturn in tenure success for our BIPOC faculty, for all of our faculty, but our BIPOC faculty in particular. And so this is a really important indicator of how our faculty are faring at our institution, and one that not all institutions actually track. Most institutions look at how many faculty overall are tenured, but it's more precise to follow faculty through the process so that you can get a sense for how many of your faculty are leaving before tenure and how many of them are ultimately making it through tenure. So let me back up.
Dr. Lechuga, can I add to what you were saying right
please.
quick? Just an important point, I think, is, you know, we used to track data in a way where if a faculty member left before reaching the tenure, then we would exclude them from the data. And I thought that did us a disservice by way of truly providing a comprehensive look, you know, to Dr. Lechuga's point with respect to faculty success. Beyond the retention, what does the trajectory in tenure and then, you know, beyond that look like? And so what you're seeing here is also this, once we accounted for this numbers, for example, of anyone who eventually was hired in the tenure track, then you started to see a bigger impact and something worth addressing even more so than if we dismissed or did not count tenure track faculty who left before reaching that point of going up for tenure. Thanks, Dr. Lechuga.
Sure. And, you know, just for a little more context, right? Tenure is not the only marker of success, but it is a key indicator for our tenure track faculty. And I will say that this methodology was borrowed from the way that graduation rates are now tracked in high school, at the high school level, right? Previously, institutions would calculate graduation rates based on what percentage started the senior year and what percentage made it to graduation, right? And you're missing out on all of the attrition that you have before getting to that senior year. And so most public school systems have moved to a cohort graduation rate, which is more accurate and more precise and more reflective of the full trajectory of that pathway in 9 through 12. And in this case, that tenure pathway. I won't really dig too deep into the data, but again, sort of reflecting the importance of keeping track of the demographics, of the metrics. We monitor sort of not just overall percentages of faculty and BIPOC faculty in particular, but how they sort of shake out in terms of rank. And do we have a situation where our faculty of color are concentrated in the lower ranks or the non-tenured ranks, or what does that sort of landscape look like? And so right here is just a visualization of our most recent faculty data showing that that 21% of our tenured, right, not the highest rank, but that coveted tenured rank is 21% of those tenured folks at our institution are BIPOC faculty. We have a higher concentration in our tenure track rank. So that's really critical because we have the potentiality of supporting their pathway through the institution and into tenure, right? And then a smaller percentage of faculty who are the non-tenure track ranks and the implications for those faculty, right, who are on a yearly contract to contract basis and don't have the sort of guarantees and protections that our tenured faculty do. Okay. Okay, Dr. Benitez.
With that said, and before "you're on mute" shows up on the next episode of Jeopardy as most popular phrases in 2021, here are some of the underlying initiatives that we've taken, again, since I've gotten here, but a lot of these have also been going on for some time before my arrival. And so let me start off with this role, right? This Director for Faculty Diversity Research and Development. As the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we don't necessarily oversee student equity here. Part of this office is very focused on faculty and staff with a heavier lens on working closely with faculty, with the provost, with the academic deans, with that circle by way of faculty diversity strategy. And, Dr. Lechuga, who has served as a fellow, for several years before my arrival, and really was able to saturate and, provide enough of a ground for us to say, what does actually committing to this work look like? And so part of this work then kind of embodied us putting together a position that is now the Director for Faculty Diversity Research and Development, which Dr. Lechuga fills and really focuses on that. And I say that to mark the importance of material commitment, right? We can take this in committee work, we can take it in very different approaches. A lot of institutions have different ways, but we thought it was important here to actually have a position that focuses solely on these efforts, beginning with recruitment, all the way through, development and eventual promotion and success. As highlighted before, right, that the key indicator is not just tenure, but eventually beyond that, how are we offering or providing support in a way that allows all to move with equity through the ranks from assistant to associate, eventually to full. And so that's a big part of why we've been able to move, I don't want to say as quickly as we want, but certainly with a sense of expedition that has allowed us to really scale up and amplify our efforts much, much quicker. As part of that, we also decided that we will start a program that will kind of key in on this effort. So we started and committed to the EDI Faculty Fellows. And the EDI Faculty Fellows was a way of us sort of having a direct connection to the different colleges and schools. So we have, 5 different colleges and schools, all together. And we have now a faculty representative or a fellow from each of those schools and colleges. And each of them serves as a liaison, and that's the process we're working on, to each of the colleges and schools. In some ways, part of this model is, I don't want to call it a train the trainer, but as we figure out whether the fellows stick with us a year or 2 years, and what creating a baseline looks like, and then enough preparation as faculty transition back to their colleges and schools fully. And these are EDI faculty fellows who we have at 1 credit course release unit, so 1 course per semester. So we have them for about 8 hours a week each for the entirety of the semester, but they're also charged with different roles. So one of them is to serve as liaisons to the respective colleges, schools, with a particular lens to faculty searches, right? And then we're kind of providing some of that development and training, again, beginning with recruitment all the way through hire. Another, focal area is the mentoring. One thing that not only the literature and the data shows, very evidently, but that we're also finding here is that there's this expectation that faculty just come and figure it out. And then there's the nuances and challenges in there around who has time and who's taking on the invisible labor, and how do we mitigate that so that we could offer the type of mentoring that is going to benefit the faculties fully. Some of the other work, is faculty members or EDI fellows sitting in on what we have as a diversity, equity, and inclusion council, leading some of the campus climate work. Others are working on faculty development, and Dr. Schepers later on is going to speak to some of those efforts in particular. Others are working on creating resource centers of sorts, so that we can be able to not only have the conversations and offer tools, but this is so important. Many institutions at times assume that by just offering resources or toolkits, that faculty are going to go in there and grab it and understand it and say, oh, I get it now, let me go ahead and do this work. And so really offering a space to teach and to work with faculty on how to use these tools, on how to put them to work, and how to implement them throughout the processes. Another one of the efforts, and Dr. Lechuga could speak more to this one, and we'll come back to that, is the Faculty Diversity Resolution Task Force, which was charged with coming up recommendations, but Dr. Lechuga, co-chairs that task force and can offer a more detailed sort of understanding of what's the type of work that goes on there and why it's so important in connecting the different efforts and synergizing them throughout the university. I will add that we already, before I got here, had in place 3 particular programs. One is the Wilton Fleming Postdoc Fellows Program, which was named after the late Dr. Fleming, who recently passed about a year ago. He was a professor of chemistry, very beloved, diversity, equity, and inclusion champion in all sorts of ways. And while we had that, it wasn't really tied to the faculty policy or guidelines in a way that we would prefer it is. So we've taken it and reviewed it. And Dr. Lechuga could speak a little bit more to that process, because we believe it's now going to be more robust. And again, creating a comprehensive structure so that the faculty, the postdocs that come through that program are successful in being able to attain not only tenure track positions, hopefully here, we do our best to create that pipeline. But at the end, they still need to apply. But anywhere that they choose or desire to go after the postdoc, that they're just ready to take on that journey. We also have a FRIP, or Faculty Recruitment Incentive Program, that has been going on actually for about 15 years. So it's been a while since that program has been going on. And it was a way, again, to be intentional and strategic, utilizing under utility reports when it was affirmative action, and that still played a major role in the way institutions functioned by way of policy and practice. And now we're going to take that up next and bringing it up to par to the more kind of acceptable ways of doing this work today. And then lastly, the Target of Opportunity program, which is TOP, which is very similar to the FRIP, but it's also open, or was open, to the staff. And one thing we did here is place a lot of all these on pause and pivot so that we could address them the right way, structurally and comprehensively, and then relaunching them with a process to track data and stay the course in place. And then the last I'll touch on is the Tenure Track Supper Club. It's really a group of faculty that the office coordinates, and we get them together twice a semester. We're now also leaning on adding a different sort of affinity tenure track supper club to that, to focus solely on the experiences of faculty of color. But through this, it's a way for us to not only honor our faculty, get them together over food and nice dinner and conversation, but be intentional and strategic to offer the type of faculty development that is a need at that particular moment, or maybe something they're interested in, or mentoring opportunities where faculty, junior faculty especially, can connect to each other while bringing in some guest people, sometimes senior leaders, other times senior faculty who have been through the process, to truly have the conversation with the junior faculty in very intentional ways. And then I'm going to allow my colleagues to hit on anything that I missed and some of the efforts that they're good work that they're doing.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit about the Tenure Track Supper Club in that taking that effort up. And one of the goals, like Dr. Benitez said, is really around mentorship as a tool, and then really connecting junior faculty to resources that might be initially overwhelming in their first year in. And so that program's been going for since 2011, and we're really thinking about how to reimagine what that might look like. And in doing so, we recently became members of the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. And this platform really attends not only to supporting junior faculty through a core curriculum and navigating academia, but it's also supportive for mid-career faculty, which often we see a drop. So we tend to see people go up for tenure and get associate, and then when it's time to go for full, there's a drop in that. So for us, it was a really big need to find a resource that was equity driven, found at the foundation, and really supported our faculty. But we didn't want just webinars that they go through. So part of the Tenure Track Supper Club, or in addition to, we will be adding in interactive engagement after each of the core curriculum has been released. And so really allowing folks to ensure that they're engaging with it, but really having a space to talk through it and think through how they're benefiting from, or what they might need to benefit from those spaces. And so along with that, there are a few other areas that really are intended for faculty support. So our Center for Learning, CTLD, Learning, Teaching, and Design has a few resources that are available for faculty. One of them is this ACU, the Association of Colleges and University Educators. And that really is engaging faculty over the course of a year. And so they collaborate with the CTLD in 5 areas. So designing an effective courses, establishing productive learning environment, using active learning environment, promoting higher order thinking, and assessing to inform practices. So throughout the year, they engage in one of those areas to really inform their teaching and support them in their teaching and their teaching practices to shift them forward. They also have the learning assistance, which has been a well-researched effect on learning and retention of our students in courses such as the STEM courses. And in addition to those learning assistants, they are currently, they piloted a program for teacher assistants. And so this TA program is now, we're really looking at the research phase of how it's supporting not only the educators of the class, but really supporting student retention through that piece. And that's really focused on undergraduate studies and a resource for our faculty as well. And then finally, we are also really focusing on anti-racist pedagogic development efforts. And that is the Office of Diversity and Inclusion really connecting with CTLD so that it's complementary and rather than duplicative work, right? Inclusive teaching developments and diversity is really front and center in these efforts so that we can really form some synergies around our support for faculty.
Yeah, Dr. Schepers, thank you for highlighting that. It's so important, right? I think a big piece of this for us is really taking the approach that the best way to support student success is by truly supporting our faculty. And it's not to say don't support the staff, we support our staff too, but we all know faculty play a very central and very particular role in the connection and the feeling connected and engaged with the institution with respect to students. So even something like the teacher's assistants, for example, this is a program that a lot of universities, perhaps it's normal. They have very robust kind of teacher assistance programs, but it wasn't for us, right? We didn't have one really in place. So coming in and looking at this and then taking some of the funds that we received through HERVs to support that sort of a remote learning and offering some of the tech support along with other support, we capitalized to say, we wonder what kind of impact might this have. The beauty about this coming out of this office is that it truly did it through an EDI lens. So we're attentive to who are the faculties who get the support, who are the students who are selected to serve as TAs, assuring that across the board, there's an equitable sense of representation by way of our students who are having these opportunities to not only grow in their own ways and to be able to develop beyond just being students to build the relationships with faculty, but to really support and show our faculty that we value them and that we value their teaching and that we want them to be successful. So that piece, not long ago, I co-wrote an article in 2017. It's in liberal education with some colleagues, but it's called supporting students of color by supporting our faculty of color, right? It was a way of saying, if we take care of what we need to take care of, then the snowball effect will begin to play out, but we'll also collect the data to track it to assure that it is playing out that way, not that it's just going to play out without us using evidence to continue the efforts or to strengthen where we have gaps.
I think I'll just make one sort of comment and invite my colleague, Dr. Schepers, too, as well, and then we can open it up to dialogue. In reflecting on the conference, the name of the conference and the focus of the conference, our work has been about aligning and collaborating across the multiple entities on campus that are either engaged in the work already around diverse faculty recruitment, retention, and success, or there's opportunities to build something. But again, sort of the alignment, and then the other piece has been not just about retention, right? Because it's recruitment. It's not enough just to bring diverse faculty into the institution. We want diverse faculty that can be responsive to the diverse needs of our students, i.e. anti-racist pedagogy, inclusive and culturally responsive teaching practices, right? In addition to having those folks come in the door, but also thinking once they're in the door, how do we support them so that they can move through the various pathways that exist for our faculty, and that they can do so successfully, right? So often when we meet with departments who are looking to increase the diversity of their hiring pools, we always emphasize and ensure that they're thinking beyond just the point of hire, right? Because it's not enough, again, just to bring diverse faculty into the door. We know that institutions of higher ed have this revolving door, right? Where they come in and they go out. And so the numbers look great because, right, they don't go down, but it's not the same people, which speaks to the research, right? And the importance of following people over time so that we can get a sense for how they're faring in our institution. I'm going to take the slides down, but Dr. Schepers, do you want to add anything as our colleague? And I know Dr. Benitez mentioned it, but Dr. Schepers is one of our faculty fellows. So again, even within the own ways in which we work as individuals, we're looking for alignment and collaboration.
Yeah, I'll just final note, especially as being a faculty fellow and really thinking about how to be a liaison. One of those processes and thinking about that engagement has been thinking through the pain points of our particular departments in going through really the recruitment phase, how the application and interviews went, and also thinking through retention and how we can support and think through those pain points for departments and support, provide supports in really mitigating some of those pain points for retention practices. And so that we can actually, for recruiting folks, some of them leave you know, before they might get offers and end up not taking them. And so really thinking through, was that at the department level that, you know, we didn't meet their needs, or we weren't an institution that they would want to be at because, you know, maybe our values weren't as visual for them. And so that's really, for me, the hope as a faculty fellow liaison in that facet, is to think through those issues and really try to problem solve.
Yeah, so at this point, we really just, if anybody, you know, has questions or, you know, any commentary or wish just to share anything, you know, from your respective institution, we just really want to open it up in the spirit of a roundtable and, you know, be responsive to some of the questions you might have, but also welcome your contributions to it. Now, don't all jump in at the same time.
Hi, I'll jump in. I'm Monika Whitaker. I'm an associate professor and chair of education down here in Colorado Springs at Colorado College. I also direct our faculty development center. And so my question, though, is about creating equity and standards for review, tenure, and promotion, right? So we know that BIPOC women do lots more service. We know that some of the scholarship that BIPOC faculty engage in is not considered rigorous, right? Or it doesn't count because we're researching ourselves, right? And so my question is, have you all engaged in or are you aware of any institutional-wide changes in these types of expectations that become a bit more equitable for faculty?
So we mentioned it briefly, and I can speak to it a little bit more, but there is a faculty diversity task force that emerged out of a diverse faculty resolution that is no surprise came, you know, I was an author on and Michael worked on that and that was passed by the Faculty Senate. And it was really around increasing the diversity of our faculty, but also being responsive to the needs of our faculty. And so our then interim provost charged a task force with looking at the recommendations in the resolution and then coming up with our own set of recommendations, and with an eye towards supporting, right, the retention of diverse faculty and to address the needs that you're mentioning in particular. And so at our institution, our faculty are assessed based on departmental guidelines for tenure and promotion. And the departmental guidelines are written by the departments, and then they must be approved, right, through the deans and then up to the associate or to the provost. And then we also have a faculty handbook that articulates very minimally guidelines for the various promotion levels. And so it's the provost's responsibility to ensure that those things align. But one of the things in recognizing exactly what you said, the challenges that the institutional barriers, the institutional barriers for our diverse faculty and moving through those processes is that because there is such autonomy for the departments to set their own guidelines, that could create, right, further inequities for our faculty. And so one of the ways we've talked about addressing that is to build into the guidelines not rewards, but that when we're assessing teaching, for example, we can look at responsive pedagogy, we can look at diverse curriculum as measures of successful teaching at the various levels, for example. And that's something that the provost, is easier for the provost to do via the faculty handbook, a little harder because, like there's that meme, if we could just address department culture, then, right, like half of the battle. And that is still the challenge for us as the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and a challenge for this task force is how do we sort of thread the needle, kind of ride that line between department autonomy, but also sort of imposing from the outside, right, these kinds of ways to address equity. We also have a workload task force that is looking at the workload overall for our faculty and advocating for a reduction. We have a 4-4 teaching load for our Cat 1, our tenure track faculty. We have a 5-5 for our Category 2 faculty. So a heavy workload. And that task force is advocating for a reduction overall, but in consultation with our office and also that task force, we've said, but how are you addressing the disparity that our women and our BIPOC faculty experience in terms of workload? And they're not quite there yet, but one of the ways we're talking about is how do we build into departmental guidelines that, you know, the equivalent of a peer-reviewed publication, for example, is a report written in service to the institution that is research-based, that has policy implications, right? That is research, right? Or how do we think more broadly about, again, the teaching, I think is not easier, because none of this is easy, given that sort of that new, you know, that negotiation of departments and administration, but the teaching piece seems to be more at least a first step in addressing how we build in some measures of equity around teaching and workload for our BIPOC and women faculty in many cases. So that's just one example of how, you know, we're trying to do that institutionally. At the same time as, you know, Dr. Schepers, I think, wants to chime in as we're working with faculty themselves to sort of navigate what currently exists. So I'm going to stop there. And Dr. Schepers, I know it looks like you want to jump in on that point.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that at the faculty senate level, we have the diversity committee, and as part of that task, we've been, you know, we're pushing to look at all department guidelines, and we are looking for how we can make recommendations in ways that those department guidelines are so vague that they leave room for bias on the reviewer portion. And so that has been what we have taken up this year, and hope to provide recommendations for each department to really think about how impactful their guidelines really are and how inadvertently biased they might be, and giving them examples of rubrics that might be more supportive in the effort of being transparent for our faculty going up for tenure. The second piece is really for my work in my department. We created a task force to look at our own guidelines. But one of the pieces that we really wanted to ensure was really transparent was our hiring process, right? Even to the point of how do chairs get chosen? And right, so as we think about the person leading the search and helping develop, you know, that job posting, it's, you know, it starts there. And so really delineating all of those and being really transparent and talking through ensuring that there's a voice for equity at every search for our departments in the School of Education specifically. And so that's something that we've undertaken over the last 3 years and will continue to do as well.
Yeah, no, thanks. The only thing that I'm gonna add to that is, you know, as we work on that, you know, that's part of how we're attempting to utilize the EDI faculty fellows, is to truly be those folks who build that foundation around these issues, around the scholarship, even around the pedagogic process of development. You know, we sleep on that. You know, sometimes I find myself in conversations when I ask the question, you know, like, are you ready? Folks are like, oh yeah, I went through a training and I'm ready to go. You know, it's almost like you know, somebody taking 2 courses and saying, you know, I'm ready to, you know, get my PhD in curriculum and instruction. You know, and so really though, also cultivating here sort of a culture of openness around what that looks like, so that there is the things we have to attend to immediately. There is the marathon that, if done right, could truly eventually sort of put in place and ground an effective system that's going to be tracked. But I think the third piece is really messaging and signaling this idea that EDI, even in the curriculum, is a canon in itself. That it's not the person of color who teaches over there, and then we want to bring them into a diversity position. No, that it's truly, we gotta demonstrate and hold a canonic respect to EDI for the work that it is as research, as scholarship, to be able to inform with consistency across the institution.
I just wanted to say one more thing. I think that we're able to sort of speak to the breadth of the work being done across campus, precisely for what Michael shared is that, right, as we build out the work that we want to do, bringing in faculty partners, and as you all know, the reality of higher ed, right, faculty, there's a lot of power within the faculty ranks. And so how do we leverage that to make some real change? And also just sharing the labor. As you know, this work it's exhausting, right? And so how do we ensure that we're sharing the labor equitably across the institution, and that it really is an institutional effort. The one thing I wanted to mention too, is it Manya, was that we have a third task force that is working on teaching evaluation. So right now we use student ratings of instructions to assess teaching, and students fill those out. And for many departments, again, harkening back to the guidelines, there are really rigid requirements for the scores that you need to have in order to be promoted. And for a lot of our faculty, our marginalized faculty and our women faculty, their portfolios, the success of that portfolio process hinges on that one criteria, which, as we know, right, student evaluations are not maybe the best way to assess. Well, they're not, right? The best way to assess teacher quality, teacher effectiveness. And so we have a task force that's really looking at what is the way to meaningfully integrate student voice into the process of understanding and assessing our teaching in a way that doesn't unfairly penalize minoritized and women faculty in the process. And again, that's something that's happening at the provost level. And we just had a big task force meeting looking for alignment across, but also my sort of goal in proposing that task force meeting was ensuring that that equity lens is running throughout. And there are people on those committees that are bringing that, but ensuring that the lens is there in those other spaces if we can't be there, and that there's continuity across those efforts in the interest of, right, supporting our BIPOC and minoritized faculty.
Thank you all so much. This is really informative. I appreciate it.
Maybe I could throw out a question, Michael. I know that the conference and our colleague, Dr. Schepers, is going to present here in about 10 minutes on the trauma-informed practices. But I'm wondering sort of what are the linkages, or what do you all see are the connections between what we're doing in higher ed to K-12 or P-12? As I'm side note, right, like I'm a scholar of secondary ed, or at least that has been my early work, but I'm just sort of thinking about what are the implications beyond the fact that we do have several, right, concurrently enrolled sections of our courses throughout campus, particularly in Denver public schools, but with other school systems. But what are maybe some of the takeaways, or how could we learn from the work that's happening in those spaces?
I'm looking at Dr. Manya and Whitaker and my other colleagues here with much more expertise than me, but I think, certainly the parallels are, it's, difficult for K-12 students to see themselves as teachers if they don't see, representative teachers that they have in their schools. And maybe likewise that, college professors don't see themselves as professors if they've never had one either. So some of those same endemic tensions, I think, run through both, and kind of leads me to a question that I have, and that is, with your recruitment efforts, and I appreciate too, you're talking about the, culturally responsive pedagogy really needing to be in there too, that, you can't just have recruitment and hope for retention without, the culturally responsive pedagogy as well. But if your efforts are targeting professions then that have, serious diversity issues like P12 educators, or, it was women in STEM and those kind of things, or if it's just kind of institution-wide.
Well, I know that for us, one of the things, Brittany, that we're doing is, we got our original 5 EDI fellows, but we, got lucky and were able to ask for a little bit more dough and get another half EDI fellow, and her role, and she's also out of the School of Education, is particularly to work with our Pathways to Possible with faculty on training the faculty how to be culturally responsive mentors to students. Right. So we're trying as best as possible kind of fill these gaps, because it's not just faculty to faculty, but, to the idea of how are we preparing students, or how are we preparing our faculty to be, better prepared to work alongside and mentor students in a culturally responsive way. Right. So that becomes sort of a cross-functional pedagogy, not just limited to the work we do with faculty, but the work that we're hoping to truly brand and saturate into the thinking of the way faculty also work with students. But very similarly, Brittany, I know that I taught a course, America Education Systems, in and out at my former institution, that focus not only on these issues, but one of the complexities is the valuing of teaching, obviously, and how that aligns or doesn't, culturally speaking, with a different set of demographics. But even the control, it's a very different challenge, the control that a state has over the curriculum for P12 versus the lack thereof of control that the state has with that same content around curriculum with institutions of higher ed.
Folks may want to comment more there, but another quick question: was there requirements to achieve the HSI status around faculty diversity? Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, no, the requirement for the HSI, and I think eventually federally that it could be, go beyond the threshold right now, but it's 25% students of color, or 25% Latinx students, not students of color, by way of HSI, and HSI could automatically be deemed an MSI. Then we have to have a certain amount of per FTE or FTE students, and also Pell eligibility by way of student representation at 50% or more, that eventually rounds up the requirements to be designated in HSI. But we're challenging that a little bit here, and really leaning into HSI serving this by way of, when you think about PWIs, when you think about HWIs, they're not the same as HBCUs and tribal colleges in particular. So HSIs and APIDAs in particular still function very much like PWIs and HWIs, unlike HBCUs and APIDAs. So we have to think differently around how we integrate a structure of serving this into an institutional and organizational culture that maybe some of these more mission-driven HBCUs and tribal colleges by way of foundation already have embedded into their operations.
Maybe just to add, there isn't any kind of faculty requirement in terms of the HSI designation. It is based on student demographics, but there is an important implication in that there's some really great research by Gina Garcia that looks at the relationship between the percentage of Latinx faculty and Latinx students, right? And that it's more than just representation. It's the pedagogy and the curriculum that they bring with them into the classroom. So while we're not keeping a watchful eye necessarily particularly in relation to the HSI on the faculty percentage of Latinx folks. It is important. And as you saw on that very first slide, and as I have learned when we started our efforts to pursue HSI status in 2007, our Latinx faculty was about at 8%. And guess what? We're like at 9%, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't really leveraged that critical piece in the way that we should. You know, our student population has increased from 2007 by about 4,000 Latinx students. And again, right, that's as a colleague told me, that's the equivalent of a small college or university. And we haven't really used that to leverage the increase in Latinx faculty in particular. And so I think about that a lot in my work, in how do we increase the diversity of our faculty overall, but there is that significant gap, that 30% of our student body is Latinx and about 9% of our faculty is Latinx. And so, yeah, that is something that that's an immediate concern for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're at time. Brittany, did you want to wrap us up so that we can head on to the next one? Just want to thank you all for joining us and for the engaging conversation.
Yeah, and if you all have, real brief, Brittany, I'm sorry, if y'all have any questions, please feel free to follow up with either Dr. Schepers or Dr. Lechuga or myself over here. You know, so right on. So thank you all.
Yeah, and if you'll share your slides, we can include that with the recording of the presentation. If you're, would be helpful too if your contact information is on there in case any of the folks that weren't able to observe today watch it and want to contact you as well. But thank you so much for your time and your expertise, and good to see you all. And please join us for any or all the rest of the week. I appreciate your inclusion.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too.